This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the backs there are. He backs it. He kicks it. Oh, the fall from Dersma. This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Joining the chorus. The Can't Lose Kangas are AFLW premiers.
Hello and welcome back once again to North Pod. Whew, what a game. That was one of the first times this year that I've just sat down and thought to myself, this is actually a great game of football. Obviously not the highest level of skill, the rain contributed to that against Fremantle, but gee, it was particularly in that last quarter, it was exciting, it was edge of seat stuff, and I really enjoyed the way that we were able to fight back in that last quarter. Unfortunately, just fell short, but I thought it was really encouraging to see the fight that we gave and the way that we were able to change a few things, particularly with what wasn't working in that first half in terms of our efficiency. I thought we saw in the last quarter we were able to get a few things going and make it happen. So another tight game against Freo over Optus Stadium. Last time we were 1-point winners, I think, if I recall correctly, a couple of years ago in that round 2 clash. 6-point loss for today, but yeah, I really thought, going into that last quarter, getting that close felt unlikely. So a weird one, definitely a strange one in terms of surmising how to feel about it, but I think overall coming out of that, you've got to take mostly positives, although certainly we will talk about some of the things that didn't work as well. So let's jump into the review for this week. So team selection and just the one change, a forced change with Charlie Comben out with that shoulder injury. Looks as though he's going to miss a month or so, which is not too bad given his injury history. I think there was some concerns that it could be a longer term thing than that. So hopefully just a month or so on the sidelines. Callan Dawson came in for him, and I guess it's more or less a like for like. Certainly Callan's a little bit smaller, but does play more of a key back role. Robert Hansen Jr. followed up as the substitute, so playing 2 games in a row as the sub, and I think, he kind of makes sense as a sub. You can make your argument about whether or not he deserved his place in the team, but I think as a sub, it kind of makes sense. It's a good role for him, and yeah, we'll definitely talk about his role in this game as we go further in. In terms of, I guess the other thing I should mention, Jackson Archer did make a return through the VFL, so I'd say he'll be available for selection next week, which is positive. I think it makes sense. He's had so many injuries and time out of the game. I thought probably a good call not to fly him over to Perth for a return game, but hopefully he'll be able to come back in next week. So let's get to the actual game. So it was North Melbourne 10-7-67 defeated by Fremantle 10-13-73. So a 6-point loss, and the deciding factor was those 6 points. It was a 10-goal apiece game, and like I said, really enjoyable game to watch for the most part. Particularly, if you're a neutral fan, I think it was a great competitive game to watch. Obviously, if you're a North fan, you're hoping to win more than the result that we got, but I don't think you could argue with the display of footy that we got, given the conditions. In terms of going through the game, I mean, early on it looked as though Logue was going to be kind of playing the Charlie Comben role, trying to get a little bit looser and play off his man a little bit. And two early contests. One, he wasn't able to make it across. Another, he was able to get across and make a spoil. So I thought, that I do think that suits his style of play. He is a relatively good interceptor. We sort of need him to be more of a 1v1 defender most of the time, but with Chom out, I thought, that was a good selection. It's not that he's loose, but he's trying to play off his man, which I think is a reasonable thing to do. I thought we didn't start fantastic. The ball was living in our back half for the first, 5 to 8 minutes or so, and it looked as though Fremantle had the momentum and they were going to be able to not take control of the game necessarily, but certainly get on top. But then I thought we got it forward and we were able to lock it in with some really nice tackling. And that was something that was maintained throughout the game. We saw Paul Curtis, Jacob Constanti, George Wardlaw all look like they'd come ready to tackle, and we'll talk about the tackle count as it goes on, but early on we definitely asserted ourselves in that area. I thought it was super impressive the way that we were able to, I guess, for want of a better term, lock it in. There was lots of repeat stoppages in our forward half or inside 50. I thought we did a really, really nice job of keeping the ball locked in and whilst we weren't able necessarily to take all of our advantages, you've got to be in it to win it, as they say. And I thought we did a really good job of maintaining pressure on the opposition. LDU was really, really busy early on. Clearances, just work around the ground, had some nice tackling as well. Kicked our first goal with his 9th touch, and I thought, it was clear that Fremantle was going to have to do something about him as the game went on, because he was just doing as he pleased in that first quarter. It was really impressive to watch. One probably 4 clearances, 9 touches, kicked the goal, like I said, and looked like he was ready to burst the game open. I think he seems to enjoy Optus Stadium. I recall 2 years ago, that game against Fremantle, he also played a really nice game. So LDU was looking up and about. George Wardlaw then created a goal for Zach Fisher with a really nice bump deep inside 50. And you thought, all right, we're on here. We've got our tails up. We're looking like we're dangerous. And I thought that was super exciting. What I was seeing there. We saw the pressure and our tackling ability really just come to the fore, rather. And I thought it looked good. Jack Darling, I guess Fremantle obviously have their 2 rucks in Luke Jackson and Sean Darcy, and I thought Sherry, obviously, we love Sherry. It looked as though he was going to be going toe to toe with either of them, but Jack Darling against against Sean Darcy was a bit of a concern for me. I thought he's certainly undersized, underweight, and he didn't look to get completely ragdolled, but he wasn't able to really compete and get the hit outs when he was in there. So that's that challenge, I think, when we're trying to play Jack Darling as that second ruck. It's not always going to work, particularly against a side with 2 really nice, really good, strong, tall ruckmen. Potentially that's where you'd want to play someone more like Bryn Teakle, but even then, I think your return on investment's probably not going to be that significant. Bryn Teakle's still going to get beaten by these 2 most of the time, so maybe you get a 5 or 10% uptick in your ruck output, but to what extent are you losing some of your forward output? Because Jack Darling certainly is a much more experienced, ready-made body around the ground and up forward. So anyway, it just, it didn't look great. I thought Sean Darcy was predominant when he went in there against Jack Darling. And I think, those kind of contests spoke to the bruising kind of game that it was. It was really contested, a lot of body-on-body stuff. Cam Zurhaar must have come out off the ground just completely bruised, purple, because he was in everything. I reckon he looked like he was going to get subbed out about 6 or 7 times. Toby Pink ran back with the flight and put his body on the line early on as well. And just, it was contest after contest. I think Zurhaar got crunched early on. I'm not sure if he was sore going in, but he certainly looked sore for the rest of the game after that contest, because he was limping around and just looked sore the entire game, and you could see why. It was such a contested game. There's a lot of pack situations, not necessarily pack marks being taken, but packs forming and bodies flying everywhere, which I guess speaks to what I was talking about earlier. It was, as a viewer, it was a really good game to watch. And then I think as that first quarter, came to a close, you could kind of see the pattern which was going to hold for most of the game, which was Fremantle was just far more efficient when they went forward. The ball would live inside our forward half for a while. We wouldn't be quite able to make something happen, and then Fremantle would slingshot forward and kick a goal. And it was a difference maker in the first half, to be honest. A lot of it was played in our half of the ground, but we just weren't able to convert even to scores, let alone to goals. So unfortunately, a really tough way to end the quarter. There was a kick across half back for Fremantle. Caleb Daniel came across and gave away a 50 for dumping Switkowski, when he wasn't in the contest, who then ran forward. We didn't put anyone in front of Switkowski to stop him from running on from the 50-metre penalty. He just let him waltz up and kick inside 50. Fortunately, the Freo player that took a mark did miss. But it was not a good way to end the quarter. And I think kind of speaks to some of these errors that I'm going to talk about as the podcast goes on. Nothing new for us here. We know that our biggest Achilles heel is just the clangers that we continue to commit, and this was one example of many in this game that was just an avoidable mistake, and one that we have to clean up if we're going to compete against the good side. So not a great way to win the first quarter, but we were pretty even after the first quarter. Coming into the second, I thought we started pretty well. LDU created a turnover in the middle with a nice push on the kick. He chased down. I can't remember if it was Brayshaw, but it may have been. But he's got a push on the kick, resulted in a turnover and meant that Larkey was free inside 50 and he kicked a goal, which was important. He'd found the going tough pretty. He'd found the going tough in the first quarter, and we know that last week he was held goalless. So I think it was important to get him into the game. And this is when the rain started falling in this second quarter. You could tell, not immediately, but as that rain got heavier, the ball got wetter, and skills got sloppier. That makes sense. I thought it was a bit tough for Toby Pink to match up. A lot of the time he was against Tracy, who was marking it really well, but certainly not the entire time. But he was getting done by the tools. He doesn't have enough height. He wasn't able to get body on before the ball was arriving. So I thought the first half he was definitely beaten. And it wasn't that he was playing a poor game. He was just playing. It was outsized. He was playing against a much more advanced, strong opposition, and it just wasn't working well for him. I thought we were dominating disposal, we were dominating momentum again in this second quarter, but Freo's efficiency was really hurting us. By the same token, we just weren't able to be any kind of efficient, which was making life for us really difficult. I thought Luke McDonald, throughout the entire game, played a really nice game, but he was doing a really good job behind the ball and locking the ball inside 50. He was a great sweeper when the ball was coming out of our forward line fast. He was often the spare to mop up and try and get the ball back inside 50 and launch with those long kicks. We know he's not necessarily an accurate kick, but he is a penetrating kick. He can get a lot of meterage on the ball. I thought he did that well. And then a big moment here towards the middle part, I guess, of the second quarter. To me, and I think to most people, it looked like Nick Larkey should have got a hold in the ball call to him in the goal square. He laid a tackle. The Freo player essentially just dropped the ball through for or behind. The umpire, you could hear him in the mic say that his perception the ball was already over before it was dropped, but that wasn't the case. It was always going to be a tough call for the umpire to make. So I'm not, hanging the umpire out to dry by any stretch. It's just disappointing, because that really cost us what would have been an important goal. And then as soon as that doesn't happen, we see Freo go and kick 3 or 4 goals really quickly. Just won the clearance, won the contested ball, and they took it up the other end and kicked goals, which was what we were not able to do. We were able to do that first part, but we were not able to finish it off with goals. So I thought around stoppage, we did a great job if we were winning the footy. If Sherry won the tap or at least split it, we did a good job of finding some spread and some players nearby. The issue was more around when we didn't win first crack, we didn't have enough spread around the stoppage. We were too front side, and so Fremantle were able to just get out with some forward hand passes and find their way forward. And invariably, if they're running forward like that, they were able to find one of their key forwards on the lead. Josh Tracy, most of the time, to be honest. But, Luke Jackson fell into the hole a couple of times. And we saw our defenders just weren't able to go with them one-on-one. And, we've heard that story many, many times before. So the end of that second quarter was disappointing. Freo were able to get a bit of momentum and put a bit of distance between them and us. I thought it was a turning point in the game. Not because Freo absolutely went on with it from there, but for a game that had lived, or where the ball had lived in our half for so much of it, to then concede 3 or 4 goals in the second part of that second quarter, was disappointing, and certainly hurt our prospects of winning the game. And I think the other thing in this second quarter, when it got wet, we saw George Wardlaw really rise to the occasion. He's really good at keeping his feet and or getting back up to his feet really quickly if he does lose his feet. He wasn't necessarily super clean, but he was cleaner than a lot of the others, and he was able to keep the ball in front of him and make an impact. So I thought, whilst it wasn't an amazing game from him, I thought when the wet weather came in, I thought he was pretty strong. And then we go to the third quarter. I mean, Cam Zurhaar coming out of after half-time looked as though he needed to be subbed. He was limping. He was not moving at any great pace, but he was not subbed and went on to get crunched in a few more contests. We saw Jack Darling insert himself into the play early on in this third quarter, took 3 really nice marks further up the ground to release. A couple of those were contested, so that was pleasing. He'd had a pretty quiet first half, and he found a way to get himself into the game early on, which is what we need from him. We need him pressing up the ground and taking those releasing marks higher up. We don't necessarily want Nick Larkey doing that all the time. I don't mind it some of the time, but we certainly prefer Nick Larkey closer to goal. If you Finn O'Sullivan unfortunately had a fresh airy for a kick off the ground that would have, gone through for an easy goal in the goal square. It was one of those ones where he probably had a fraction more time than he thought. He had enough time, I think, to bend down and pick it up and kick it rather than trying to kick it off the ground. In some tricky conditions, it's wet. The ball wasn't still; it was still moving around a little bit. So, it's a tough one, but that one really hurts. It should have been a goal that would have got us back into the game at that point, I think. And we just really struggled in this third quarter to get a mark in our front half. We were able to get the ball in there, but we weren't able to necessarily lock it in or get some real consistent ball going because we weren't able to take a mark, within 80 metres of our goal. Pardon me. And again, a mistake. Sheasel gave away a 50-metre penalty sort of just forward of the wing for Fremantle. He came into a contest a little late. I thought it was a little bit harsh. I thought he was going. The umpire had been a little bit delayed in blowing his whistle for the mark. It was one of those ones that looked like it could have potentially bounced or slipped out given the conditions. Sheasel didn't necessarily smash the play or anything like that, but he came in to make a contest. Unfortunately, the 50-metre penalty was given away, and again, Switkowski kicked a goal. So that, again, it's just one of those mistakes that really hurts. It's not an absolute, coach killer because you could see the intent there. You could see why Sheasel did it, but in terms of the momentum of the game, we worked so hard to get the ball in our half, and then Freo get a pretty easy goal through an avoidable mistake. I thought then we saw some really good fight in this third quarter. Luke Parker kicked a nice goal from a free kick, and you can see that he cares. He really, really cares. It's obviously his first year at the club. He's played 300-odd games for Sydney, but he's come across, and the bloke wants to win, and I think you've got to respect that. He was really pumped up when he kicked that goal. And we saw Callan Dawson subbed out for Robert Hansen Jr. I really thought it was going to be Cam Zurhaar subbed out. He just looked so sore, but I would imagine there would have had to have been a conversation between Clarko and him around, are you good enough to play? Because obviously if he is, he's a super important player for us. But it was Callan Dawson that came out, which, he wasn't having much of a game at all. So I take that. But it did leave us a little bit short in defence. It meant that Luke McDonald had to play a little bit taller as a result. But it signalled, I guess, that we were going for it. We were trying to play a bit more of attacking style of play. We were going to get Robert Hansen Jr. onto that wing and half forward role. And, you could see the reasoning for it. We'll talk about it in a minute, but Hansen Jr. had a really nice last quarter. Unfortunately, to end that quarter, I guess two big moments. There was an unforced error again that gifted Freo a goal. LDU didn't give the ball back to the umpire for a restart in the middle of the ground. They took a free kick. Did Freo, kicked it long. Toby Pink drops a chest mark, trying to slide in, and that was something that he did several times throughout the day. Again, tough conditions, I get that, but he probably dropped one or two too many of those chest marks that are tough, but he has to take. Again, Fremantle pick it up, kick a goal, which really hurt. Fortunately, Jack Darling was able to kick one pretty much on the siren to keep us in it at three-quarter time. Took a mark in at about the 50-metre line, went sort of balks to go inside, was called to play on, so he just kicked long, and then Larky did a slight shepherd through for a goal on the goal line, which, kept us in touch. So I'll check what the score was here at three-quarter time, but it was one of those ones where you go, technically we're in touch, but you probably isolated didn't feel like we were really in it. We were 22 points down, 41-63. So, relatively in the game, but when you think about the fact that we'd only kicked 6 goals at that point, and we were probably going to have to kick 5 or 6 to win the game, it was looking tough. But the third quarter, we came out and kicked some really quick goals, kicked the first 3 goals of the quarter, 4 goals actually, in fact. We kicked the first 4. Super, super impressive because we were able to get that momentum and just keep it going. We had finally this game where we've just been tackling and not necessarily getting reward for effort. 2 of those free kicks we got holding the ball calls for. One was Finn O'Sullivan on Nat Fyfe at a half back, and the other one was Jacob Constantinou and Luke Ryan at half forward. We got a goal from that one. Jacob Constantinou kicked the set shot. We had another really nice win on the half back flank, and Robert Hansen Jr., who, like I said, was subbed in midway to late third quarter, looks like he was just going to break the game open. He ran down the wing a couple of times, had some really nice link-up chains and kicks along that wing and was super impactful. In this moment, got the ball onto George Wardlaw. I really thought that Wardlaw had to go short. There was a couple of options that were sort of 25 to 30 metres in front of him, but inboard. He decided to kick long to the pocket. Nick Larkey, I think, won a free kick, or I don't think it was a mark in this instance. Oh yeah, it was a front on contact free kick. I thought pretty fortunate, thinking back to that moment now, but Larky kicked the goal, which got the margin back to 12 points. And then again, Luke McDonald, great, won a holding the ball call on half back again. We chained up through Hansen Jr., who absolutely nailed Nick Larky in the pocket. It was a beautiful kick to his advantage, which is just a showcase for the sort of kicking that Robert Hansen Jr. can do if he's able to find more of the footy. Nick Larky kicks the goal, and all of a sudden that tackling and that pressure that we had been applying all game was starting to pay off. Robert Hansen Jr. again had a nice impact on the wing, won it from a tackle from Simpkin. He hit Luke Parker, who then goaled from 50, and all of a sudden we're 1 point behind. We've got all the momentum, and you felt at this point we're going to win because Fremantle hadn't had an answer. We'd kicked goal after goal after goal, and we looked as though we were, as the commentators sometimes say, it's a saying that I don't love, but we were running on top of the ground. It looked like we were running more freely and we had the momentum. Finn O'Sullivan had a couple of really big moments down back, a spoil deep and an intercept mark that was super important. Riley Hardeman had a massive spoil on the goal line, was able to get his body and manoeuvre his body so he was able to just get a fist on a ball that was otherwise would have been a goal. And I felt at that moment there was just things that were going our way in this last quarter that made you feel as though we were going to run away with it. We were at one point able to get the scores back to a draw or to all square. The middle part of this last quarter was a lot of no scores, a couple of points either way, and it felt like the game could go either way. Unfortunately, Luke Jackson was able to kick a goal to put Fremantle in front by a goal. It wasn't an nail in the coffin at that point. There was still 3 or 4 minutes left, but you did feel like in a game where there wasn't a lot of, it was a lower scoring game. You felt like that was going to make it really tough for us. We did get chances after that. Luke McDonald was bursting away down the wing and took a bounce. Should not have taken a bounce. It didn't come back to him, and the ball was turned over and went back Fremantle's way. And then in the last, 45 seconds, we did go inside 50. We'd actually got out the back of the Fremantle zone. We were in a pretty strong position, and Josh Tracy came in and took a really important intercept mark. He was essentially 1 against 4, but it wasn't a contested mark. It just happened to fall to him. He took the mark. He did kick it out of bounds on the full straight after that, but we weren't able to get the ball inside and hit a target. So one last chance, but it was a really, really good last quarter to watch. Just super impressive football, and the fact that we're able to fight back from 4 or so goals down, get the game all square, and look as though we're going to win. It hurts. It's another game that really we probably could have and should have won, and I think that's tough because in a season with so few wins and in a position that we're in where we just want to keep winning to propel ourselves up the ladder. This was another winnable game, but I don't think you could knock the effort in a game where the conditions were pretty tough. We were playing technically an away game, technically a home game, but certainly really functionally an away game. There was a lot that wasn't going our way, and to fight our way back into the game, I thought was really special. So, look, tough not to win, but like I said off the top, I think you've got to take some nice, clear positives out of the game because this is certainly one of those ones that last year or 2 years ago, we get 4 goals down at 3/4 time and we get blown out in the last quarter. But I thought Robert Hansen Jr. really injected something into the game for us, and Sherry around stoppage was able to get us some clean clearances and get us some momentum, and we were able to at least be a little bit more efficient going forward in that last quarter. So not a win, but I think, like I said, pretty hard to be super disappointed with the way that we went about it in that last quarter. So, story of the game, I sort of spoke about it several times through the Raw Review section. There were 2 things that I think were super impactful in the result of this game. We were a tackle inside 50 machine, which is so unlike us for a team that usually struggles with it. I think we had the most tackles inside 50 for a team for several years. So that was fantastic for us. We had 29 tackles inside 50. They had 7. So it was a really strong tackling game for us. But I think the numbers were a little bit inflated just because of the fact the ball did live inside our forward 50 for long periods and we weren't able to score. So whilst the pressure was really strong and we were able to apply a lot of pressure, the problem was we weren't able to score. And our efficiency, whilst it did improve a little bit in that last quarter and probably make the stats look a little bit better for us, it was a real worry. So Fremantle went at 50% from 48 entries, which is to say that they scored from 50% of their 48 entries, whereas North Melbourne went at 33% from 60 entries. So we had 12 more inside 50s, but just were not able to put the score on the board. And like I said, we did score pretty heavily in that last quarter. Prior to that, our efficiency was sitting a lot lower than that. I think what it amounted to was a lot of congested ball inside our forward 50. Fremantle were then able to slingshot and eventually generally score, particularly in that second quarter burst where they did their damage. So it's a bit of a catch-22 here. You've got to be happy with our tackling and our pressure and the way that we're able to lock it in. But the fact that we weren't able to convert that to actual scoreboard pressure is the problem here. We weren't able to then get reward until that last quarter. And even then, the last quarter scoring wasn't really as a result of locking it inside 50. It was actually the pressure that we were applying higher up the ground at half back on the wing, and then moving the ball fast into our forward line to get those one-on-one situations. That was what actually resulted in our goals. And so you kind of look at it and go, sure, we locked it in, but in a way, we almost played into Fremantle's hand because it allowed all of the players to swarm around the inside 50, and then they got those one-on-one opportunities, got out the back and got the fast ball going their way when they eventually won the clearances. Because this wasn't one of those games where we were dominating clearance, where we just won. We were on top, but every time Freo got a clearance, they looked a lot more dangerous from us once they got the ball forward because they had one-on-ones and they had space to play with, and their key forwards were able to get into the game. So I think we've got to find a way to not allow the opposition to play that way against us. It essentially allows the opposition the perfect opportunities to score because we know our defenders one-on-one are generally not as strong as other teams in the competition. Every time it went forward, Voss, who's someone that I haven't seen a lot of, he looked really dangerous. He had 3 goals, and the Riley Hardeman touch cost him his 4th goal. And I thought Shea Bolton, who looked really dangerous every time the ball hit the ground, around that 50-metre mark of the Freo's 50. So, they had some really dangerous-looking players. Sure, Paul Curtis was around the fringes. He wasn't able to kick a goal, but he had a lot of tackles. And we had, Luke Parker go forward and kick 2 goals as a midfielder. Larkey was opportunistic and able to kick 3 from not a lot of disposals. But, I can't help but feel like although the numbers looked great for us in terms of the tackling, it didn't necessarily play to our strengths because invariably it meant that the ball was slingshotting out of there and Fremantle were able to be efficient and score, relatively quickly, particularly in that second quarter. So it's an interesting one. You can't be upset about the tackling, and I think the coaching group would be reviewing that pretty strongly and saying, this is fantastic, we want to keep the ball locked inside 50, but we do have to figure out how we score in those congested situations, or is it that we need a bit of a reset, we need to go backwards to go forwards, as it were, because I think at times it just looked like we didn't have the capacity to break through that clearance, particularly in a wet game. I think that impacts things as well. Obviously, it's harder to be cleaner in a wet game, and when the ball is contested and it's pretty tight, you've got to be pretty clean to win clean ball. So, look, an interesting one. We're happy with the tackling, but we've got to find a way to not leave our defenders one-on-one so often and not allow teams to slingshot against us when the ball's been living inside our forward 50 for so long. Shinboner of the week, and look, there was a couple of players it could have been. I've gone with Riley Hardeman, who's not actually in the votes. I thought he had a relatively quiet game, but that spoil on the goal line that I mentioned after it looked like Voss had kicked the winning goal at that point, just so strong to get a fist on it under immense pressure. He was being bodied and shepherded out of the way. And he was able to wait until the last moment to take that body pressure and just reach, I think it was with his left arm, if I recall. I'm not too sure, but he was reaching to his left and got the slightest fist on the ball right in the goal line. It wasn't, I think the fact for me was it could have been a match winner for us. It wasn't in the end because we weren't able to kick a goal, but that was a match saver in that moment and could have been the moment that won us the game if we were able to do a little bit more offensively. So for me, that's Shinboner stuff. Like I said, he didn't have a remarkable game by any stretch, but I think in terms of Shinboner efforts, that was a real gutsy effort for a young player to have the acumen and the mental capacity to make sure that he got a fist on it. Was really impressive. Certainly there are other players. I mean, Cam Zurhaar playing the way that he did through injury or soreness was to be applauded. I thought that was fantastic. He would have been a valiant winner, I thought. George Wardlaw playing in the wet conditions. And also I thought Luke Parker is one that I'll talk about him in a minute, but I thought his game was pretty Shinbonery as well. I mean, that's the kind of player that he is. He's a gutsy, strong, no-nonsense kind of player, and that's what, weather can bring out those kind of players. But yeah, I thought for that moment on the goal line, Riley Hardeman deserves Shinboner of the week. In terms of the other voting, no one with a 4. We didn't win the game, and there wasn't anyone with a match-winning performance. And I thought we had lots of 2s and 1s. I wasn't able to find anyone for a 3. Probably the closest to a 3 might have been Luke Parker, to be honest, but he just probably wasn't efficient enough with his kicking. It wasn't the sort of game that was going to be the case. But I've got a couple of 2s here. So Harry Sheasel, 32 touches, kicked a goal, 9 marks, 6 tackles, 7 inside 50s. Another consistent game. He sort of seemed to spend a bit of time in the back line, a bit of time through the middle part of the ground, not necessarily playing centre bounce footy, but he certainly spent some time through the middle part of the ground playing as that extra midfielder once the ball was thrown up. Did have that moment where he gave away the 50, but like I said, you could see what he was trying to do. I thought, a lot of his disposals were effective and got the ball going our way. He's always got a pretty steady hand and a pretty steady head, so another consistent performance from him. Still not up to his absolute amazing work from the last 2 years, but I think that's what we're going to see from him at the moment this year. Luke McDonald, I mentioned, he had a really nice game across halfback, 27 disposals, 8 marks, 1 of those contested, 580 metres gained, 12 intercepts, 4 inside 50s. And there was one moment in the last quarter where he just shanked a hand pass to someone running forward that fortunately he was able to get back and make an impact on the contest, and it wasn't a turnover that cost us, but that was his one clanger. I thought besides that, he found himself in the right position consistently. Like I said, often making himself the loose player when the ball was locked inside our forward front half, and he was able to keep it locked in by finding himself in the right position. And then when Callan Dawson went off the ground and he had to play a little bit taller, I thought he did a pretty solid job at that. He's always going to be undersized playing against someone like Amos or one of the resting rucks or something like that, or Josh Tracy. But I thought, he did a good job on Voss and was able to defend really well. And one of his better games for the year, I thought. Luke Parker, I mentioned, 20 disposals, 2 goals, 4 marks, 1 of those contested, 3 tackles, 7 clearances, 7 inside 50s, 580 metres gained, and just a no-nonsense game in the wet. I've said this so many times this year. This is the exact reason we got him across. He's a midfielder that can go forward and kick goals. He's a strong body, and he knows what to do when the going gets tough. So was really impressed with the fight that he showed and how passionate he was. As someone who's not a North Melbourne guy through and through, to see the passion with which he was playing for the blue and white, I thought was really, really impressive. And then LDU, he did get quieter as the game went on. Like I mentioned, had 9 touches after about 10 minutes of play, but 27 disposals, a goal, 5 tackles, 6 clearances. I think, early on when the game was there to be won, I thought he was good. And then he had a couple of really nice defensive moments, which is something that, in other weeks and other matches, that's been questioned. But like I said, had a really important push, had a big tackle as well that led to turnovers and led to scores for us. So I thought, he was on the fringes of a 2 or a 1, but he was just so impressive early on. And then I thought did his job, even though he was clamped down on a little bit by Fremantle. So hard to knock his game. So there's the 2s, and then lots in the 1 here. So I'll try to whip through these a bit quicker. Tristan Sherry, it was a bit of a nil-all in the ruck. I thought he competed and played his role, but it wasn't one of his better games. 13 disposals, 36 hit-outs, 6 clearances, 7 tackles, 2 goal assists, 2 marks for Tristan Sherry. Probably broke even with the Fremantle rucks when he was in there, but they certainly got on top of Jack Darling when he went in there. Dylan Stevens, 27 disposals, 400 metres gained, a goal assist. Was pretty prolific on that wing. Did his job. Accumulated and got the ball forward. Didn't make too many mistakes. So he's been a super impressive player this year for us. Much improved from what we saw last year. Colby McKercher, pretty similar, but playing a little bit deeper as that half-backer, 27 disposals, 620 metres gained, 3 inside 50s. And I thought chained up really well. Wasn't as efficient by foot as we might like, but again, in the wet conditions, you can understand that. George Wardlaw, 17 touches, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 6 clearances, a goal assist, 6 inside 50s, 22 pressure acts, so played his role, wasn't able to find as much of the footy as he might like, but wet weather footy, like I mentioned in the Brew review section, I thought when it got wet, he was one that rose to the occasion and played really well, kept his feet and kept the ball going our way. Finn O'Sullivan, 14 disposals, 6 marks, and just some massive moments with the game on the line that last quarter. It was more about, if I think about a one vote, I typically give to someone who played their role who had a couple of really important moments, and I think that was Foss. The intercept mark and that spoil deep in the last quarter was super important. I thought he's just so assured. I think we've found another one with that number 2 pick. But what I mean by that is, I think it's fair to say he's not going to be a miss. I think he's going to be a player for us. Whether or not he ends up as an out-and-out midfielder, that's certainly the thought. At the moment, he's playing a really nice roll-off half-back. Paul Curtis, similarly, I thought played his role, 12 disposals, 9 tackles, all of them inside 50. So that's why he's here. 3 marks, 2 clearances, but it was that tackling in the front half and that immense pressure that's gotten him the vote here. The 9 tackles is something that that's what he's in the side for if he's not able to kick goals, and he was able to do that in this game. And Nick Larkey, 3 goals, 12 disposals, 3 marks, 2 tackles. Found the going tough, I thought, but it's hard to ignore the 3 goals, particularly 2 goals when the game was there to be won in the last quarter. The fact that he was able to convert. He did miss one, shanked off the side of his boot, which seems to be his way a bit this year. He's still relatively accurate, but every now and then he misses one or just skews one way off where you thought, how's he done that? Because he's usually such a reliable kick. But yeah, hard to go past him for a vote with the 3 goals. And then Robert Hansen Jr., I've got him in for a vote, only the sub, but 7 disposals, 2 marks, 224 metres gains, and 3 goal assists. You cannot ask for much more than that from your sub. So like I gave Dylan Stevens, I think, 1 vote for a game as sub a little while ago. I think Robert Hansen Jr. as the sub here couldn't have provided much more. And like those 3 goal assists, a game high 3 goal assists, no less, super important as that player coming in on the wing and as a high half forward. So super impressive game from him as the sub, and again showed his kicking capacity, which is a really important skill for us because we're not a good side kicking inside 50. So just to go over them again, 2 votes Sheasel, McDonald, Parker and LDU, and 1 vote Sherry, Stevens, Hansen Jr., McKercher, Wardlaw, Foss, Curtis and Larkey. And as you'd expect, in a performance that was relatively impressive, quite a few players in the votes, but just no one that was able to get us across the line for the 3 or the 4 vote game. In terms of where that leaves the standings, it's looking pretty familiar from last year now. Sherry 18, Sheasel 16, LDU 13 on the podium, but very close behind them. Curtis 12, Parker 11, Simpkin and McDonald 10, Powell, Zerha 9, Larkey and Stevens on 8, and then some 7s, some 6s and some 5s underneath that. But, I think my voting system and the adjustments I made this year is showing, a little bit more around the players that are playing the best for us. Sure, Sherry, Sheasel and LDU were the 3 that were on the top last year, but the gap between them and the next best is closing with Curtis, Parker, Simpkin, McDonald all not far behind. So more than halfway through the year now, there's still a bit to play, but Sherry, like I said last year, I think he's going to be tough to beat just because he's going to vote in most games, I think, at this point. He's such a dominant ruckman. At this point, I would like to thank everyone for supporting the show. Please help me by sharing the show with any North Melbourne fans that you know. Subscribe on your chosen podcast service, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And you can get involved with my social media accounts at NorthPod Show. You can find me on X, Instagram, etc. If you would like to support the show in an additional way, you can buy me a coffee, or I do typically buy a Coke with that money. So you can find the link for that in my show notes, or it's buymeacoffee.com/NorthPod Show. Kanga clipboard time, and look, it's just another game where our lack of elite tall defenders really hurt us. Freo's ability to mark inside 50 and in their forward half compared to us was a big difference. They took 8 inside 50 marks to our 6, but when you consider that we spent far longer inside 50, that number looks a little bit different in that context. They also took 13 contested marks to our 4, and several of those were inside 50. Josh Tracy was the biggest one. He took 8 marks and made life really hard for our backs at various times. Griffith Logue was able to get across and spoil sometimes. Toby Pink worked his way into the game, but we're undersized in that area. And I think if we go in undersized, and we're going to most weeks, it's going to be tough going for our key defenders. And that's why one-on-one we're not a good side. We're undersized, we're under strengths, and whilst we have a lot of options now for those defensive options, Will Dawson, Matt Whitlock, these are the players that whether or not they end up playing forward or back, we're waiting for them to develop ultimately. And I think you can kind of see why we took that risk last year with trading in our number 1 draft pick for this season, which, on a numbers basis, it still isn't looking fantastic, to be honest. But you can kind of see it because we said to ourselves, we want to get Matt Whitlock now. We believe in him as a player, and we need to start developing him now. Whereas if we take a Matt Whitlock-like player in this year's draft, we're a year behind in development. Now, whether or not Whitlock, works out is up for debate. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I think you can at least see the logic behind wanting to get him in, or a player like him in, as soon as possible. Will Dawson, similar. He's nearly 2 years into his development now, although we're playing him forward in the VFL, so a bit of a different story. But, I think you can see at least we've got the players that we want to be those players for the future. We're just waiting for them to develop, and at the moment it does leave us a little bit short down there and a little bit lacking in options. But nonetheless, it's another game where one-on-one defensively we're not up to it. Obviously, having Charlie Comben out doesn't help as well. It's always, whilst he's not a good one-on-one player either, he's really good at coming in as that third option in a marking contest and either intercepting or spoiling. So not having him there didn't help. But yeah, it's nothing new for us there. Like our clangers, which I'm about to talk about, it's not a new thing. So I guess moving on to that, it's another game where couple of silly, horrible errors cost us a chance to win this game. Whilst you could say we had those chances late in the game to win, I think there's so many of these situations where, unfortunately, 1 or 2 of these we don't stuff it up and we win the game. LDU's bouncing down the wing should have either bent down to touch on the ground or just kick long. Because I'm watching off TV, I don't know what his options were, but he bounced it, didn't come back to him, he loses possession, the ball's turned over. We had those 2 50-metre penalties against Harry Sheasel and Cab Daniel, both of them directly leading to goals. We had Finn O'Sullivan fresh airing that kick in the goal square that should have been a goal off the ground. There's several of our kicks that were just awful, that missed targets inside 50. All of these things are things that we have seen time and time again this year, in previous years. It's nothing new. And I think, really, I'm actually choosing to see the positive in this, because this is something that I think is easier to fix. This is a slight personnel upgrade and a slight coaching techniques, fixing these kinds of things up. Like, these things are fixable. If it was complete structure issues, which we have seen in previous years, that's a lot harder to fix. But seeing the positives, when we're able to mitigate these errors, when we're able to minimize them happening, we're going to compete and we're going to win a lot more games that we're actually in. This is another game. It's probably the 3rd or 4th game this year where if we had 2, maybe 2 less of those critical errors, we win the game. And so, on the positive side of things, we're really close. We're on the precipice of winning these kinds of games, but we've got to find a way to stamp these things out. So 2 negatives in the clipboard, even though I do think holistically I'm feeling pretty positive about the game. But I think those 2 things were the glaring things that, neither of those things are new, but I think we've got to keep shining a light on it, because if we don't, we're losing sight of why we're not able to win these games. We have to be able to compete one-on-one in our defence, and we have to be able to stamp out these clangers from our game and these unforced errors. I'll take a clanger if it's under severe pressure and we make an error. It's more these errors, like I think of the Luke McDonald hand pass that missed the target by 5 metres. That's unforced. That's come about because it's wet, sure, but he didn't need to make that mistake. He was trying to get the game on fast. He made an error. Similar with the 50-metre penalty calls. Both of those, we're trying to do the right thing. In both instances, we're trying to stop the opposition from transitioning quickly, but we've just been a little bit overzealous with it. We've given away 50 and it's cost us. So those things, I think, one's easier to fix than the other. It's easier to fix the clangers. It's less easy to fix our defensive woes because we just don't have the personnel right now to do so. But on the positive side, looking on my clipboard here, I thought the tackling effort was absolutely brilliant and a great response from last week where I thought it wasn't a strength of our game. I thought West Coast definitely out-tackled us last week. The tackle count was 77-66, so we won that by 11 and we were well above our season average. And I just think it was the right kinds of players with those tackles. Paul Curtis, I mentioned, had 9 tackles. Sherry had 7. Wardlaw, Sheasel and Fisher had 6. And Constantia and LDU had 5. So it's our mids and our sort of medium-sized to small forwards that were laying those tackles, which speaks to why we were able to lock the ball inside forward 50 for those longer periods. You need and you want those players laying the tackles. If it's your defenders that are leading your tackle count, sure, you want your defenders to be able to tackle, but it says that they're not getting hands on the footy and it says the ball's spending a lot of time in our back half. That wasn't the case in this game. The ball definitely spent more time in our forward half, and that's a direct result of a lot of those tackling efforts. And I thought in the last quarter, we finally got to see us, hold sway and win momentum with those tackles because we won several holding the ball calls. It's not that I think that we were due heaps and heaps of holding the ball calls that didn't go our way or anything earlier on the game. Like there was that Nick Lucky one in the goal square, sure, and maybe one other that you think, gee, that could have been holding the ball, but I think it was just weight of numbers and sheer pressure that eventually we were able to break the Dockers a little bit and then able to finally apply enough pressure to win those calls. So that's what it takes at AFL level. You can't just apply pressure for 5 or 6 minutes and hope that that's going to be enough. It's got to be sustained, and we've seen teams break us in the past with that sustained pressure. I think of the Collingwood game only a couple of weeks ago, the first half we were able to stay in it and stay competitive, but their pressure eventually wore us down and they were able to kick those goals. So look, if we're able to keep this kind of pressure going and keep this tackling pressure going, I think we'll be in a good place. The only caveat I would say is that when we weren't able to lay those tackles and Fremantle were able to evade, we probably were a little bit too aggressive, and that meant that they were able to exit the stoppage and clearance situations a little too easily if they were able to evade a tackle or two and get the ball moving front half. But ultimately, this is the pressure and the application that we want to see every week. I thought it was a really impressive defensive, pressuring performance. And now that we know we can do that, I want to see that every single week. And I think every fan would feel that way. It was, a really, really good game to watch and a really good physical game to watch as well. And that's what we want as fans. You either want to sit down and win it and watch a win, or at least if you're not watching it, when you want to go, okay, I was entertained by that game, and I think I could say that based on this game of football. Around Arden Street, this is our last segment, and VFL unfortunately weren't able to back up their strong form. They had a loss to Port Melbourne 73-96. Pretty competitive performance, so it looked like the game got away from them a bit early, but then they were able to pull it back a little bit. So not a bad performance by any stretch, and certainly some players that were pushing for selection. Again, Will feel super busy, 26 touches, 12 tackles, 6 clearances. I think he is ready for... I definitely expect him to get a recall at some point this year, particularly given that he's coming out of contract. I think we're going to want to see a little bit of him before we have to make a decision on him. So he was really impressive. It was good to see Jackson Archer return through the VFL and play some footy as well. And then just some players that I guess, whilst they're not banging down the door, I think are doing enough to warrant talking about. So Geordie Payne, yet to debut, 23 touches and 9 tackles, could be an option as that extra smaller forward, if we wanted to give him a go instead of Robert Hanson Jr. or if we wanted to give Jake Kostani a rest, he's an option there. Cooper Harvey again, 21 touches, kicked a goal, 5 tackles. Whilst it's not a dominant performance, he continues to play well. And like Wilfield, I think I would like to see him at AFL level before the year is out. CCJ, in his return from injury, or his second game, but building after his return from injury, 20 disposals, 14 hitouts, 8 marks. So a solid performance. Finbar Maley went back and kicked 3 goals, which is nice, had 9 marks. Bailey Scott had 19 disposals. Zane Dersma kicked 3 goals and had 15 touches, which is nice again for him. I would like to see his disposal count a little bit high, but 3 goals is a nice return. And then we saw Braden George hit the scoreboard with 2 goals. Zach Banch kicked another goal. Brent Teagle kicked a goal. So you can see our AFL listed players are at least putting their hand up and playing some solid footy. I would expect to see a change or two this week personally. Not sure at this stage, but I would love to see Wilfield get in the team, and I really would like to see someone like Cooper Harvey get a chance. So that's kind of where I'm looking. Jackson Archer is another that you'd think is likely to come back in. Potentially, you'd bring him in at the expense of Callan Dawson, potentially. Just depends how tall we feel we need to be against Carlton, who I guess if we transition the talk to that's who we're playing next week. Saturday, June 21 versus Carlton at the G. A 1:20 game, a weird time slot for a Saturday game, but nonetheless, 1:20 Saturday against Carlton. They're not in super form at the moment, so it's a great chance for us to win. They do, however, play the Eagles this afternoon. I'm recording this on Sunday morning rather, so they're playing this afternoon. They could play themselves back into some form against the Eagles, but holistically speaking, they're playing for their season. They're still sitting towards the bottom of the ladder. We know they've got some good players. Sam Walsh won't be playing. He's a damaging player, so I guess that's handy for us. But, Mackay and Curnow have traditionally been really tough matchups for us. Good Friday was not a good performance for us this year. So, I go in with low expectations, but I don't think it's out of the question that we could put in another solid performance. We've been really solid since that Good Friday performance, to be honest. It's been one bad game really in that trot. So, look, just like every week, just like this game, I want to go in feeling as though we can win. I feel like we're a chance to win, but I don't expect to win. I just want to see us compete. Hopefully a couple of changes. Not having Charlie Comben does hurt. We would have loved to have his height down there in defence, but I think we have enough players to play with there. And I think, it should be a good game, but particularly because Carlton should go in really nervous. If they don't win this, their season's over. I don't think that's an exaggeration. They need to win these games that they should win, so to speak. So, super interesting game. The fact that we're playing another game, the G, I think is great. Whilst I do prefer playing at Marvel, I think we've got to start to play a bit more footy at the MCG. It's a venue that we've played very little football at recently, so should be a good one. Hopefully it's not freezing cold and wet, but we're certainly in the middle of winter right now here in Melbourne, so I think that's what we'd expect. Yeah, have a fantastic week. I guess, before I close out, just one last comment. There were a lot of people in the media, I guess, talking about the fact that we, in selling these 2 home games to Perth, have made a grave error and that we've, thrown away some potential wins for money. And I hope that these 2 performances, the 1 win, 1 loss, sort of spits in the face of that a little bit because, whilst you might say, hey, we could have beaten Fremantle if we played them in at Marvel Stadium, it was a great performance. It was a great game. And I think we're not in a position right now where financially we can rest on our laurels. We know that Tasmania is not going to happen for us anymore moving forward. So I think it absolutely makes sense to try and find some other money elsewhere. And playing these 2 games, which we're going to be playing for the next several years, I think, makes financial sense. You can knock it from a game perspective, but ultimately it's a business. Football is a business, and we've got to make some money. So I think these 2 performances, hopefully at least this year, whilst it's not going to shut people up, I do think it at least shows that, hey, playing these games away, or away home games, so to speak, is not going to absolutely hamstring us going forward. Look, it's year 1 of many, so take it with a grain of salt. But I just thought it was worth commenting on that because there have been some people pretty critical of the decision, and I think they're the sort of people that maybe don't. They just look at it from a football perspective and don't have the club's best interests in mind. So anyway, that's enough of that rant for me. Do hope you have a fantastic week, and speak to you in a week or so. As always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.